Not all steak grilling methods are created equal. You have to know how, but more importantly, when to apply them. Let's take these two steaks for an example. I've got a fabulous 2.5 inch thick Tomahawk Ribeye as well as a 1 inch thick T-bone. Now the Tomahawk is going to take a lot longer to cook and you're going to have to do it a different way, so let's get started. For thick steaks over 1.5 inches thick, you're going to want to use the method of choice, and that is the reverse sear. And that's where you start off low and slow to get it warmed all the way through. Then you get a ripping hot bed of coals and get an amazing crust in the end. The biggest mistake that I've made while grilling steaks is using the reverse sear method when I shouldn't. For a thin steak, if you start to warm it through and then go and sear it, if you're shooting for medium rare, you may end up in medium well territory or all the way to well done. This really only works for the thicker steaks of 1.5 inches thick or thicker. To set up the kettle for the reverse sear, add about 15 charcoal briquettes, and that should be enough to get us to 250 degrees. That's not enough charcoal briquettes to use a chimney, so go ahead and use whatever your favorite fire lighting method is. Another one of the big mistakes that I've made is not waiting long enough to put the steaks on the grill. It should take 10 or 15 minutes after you shut the lid, but the smoke is the best tell. If it looks like that, it's not ready. What you want is something that's a lot closer to clear, otherwise you're going to mask the flavor of the beef with some nasty smoke, and you want that steak to shine through. Now we're ready to put it on the grill. You want to take your meat and put it on the side opposite the coals. The coals are over here and the meat's over there. That'll keep it from burning. Then you put the vent right over the meat, and that's going to give you better convection, so the heat will move over the steak and out through the vent. It's going to cook a lot better that way. I'm going to let this go until it reaches 115 degrees internal temperature for medium rare, but I'm also going to flip it halfway through somewhere around 90 degrees because it's going to cook a little bit faster from the top to the bottom, and we want to keep things even. And if you're wondering how I prep the steaks, I used a 1/2 teaspoon of salt per pound of meat, and then I put them in the fridge uncovered so that way they could dry brine a little bit. The thin steak was for 8 hours, and the larger steak was overnight, or at least it would have been if it wasn't frozen solid yesterday, but you got to pick your battles. Now go ahead and try it both ways. If you have a dry brine steak versus a regular steak, you're going to find that the dry brine steak is a lot juicier and the salt flavor goes through it rather than just on the surface. And now for my favorite part, the sear. If you're doing this right, you want to start 3/4 of a chimney of charcoal and make it fully lit right as that steak reaches that magic temperature of about 115 degrees Fahrenheit. It was pretty hard to do that and get it timed exactly perfect. And so if you have to, err on the side of getting it done after the steak reaches that temperature. So you can always take it off and put it off to the side and then get those coals later. But if you've got a pile of ash, you're going to have to start over and get the coals lit again. Now that the coals are fully lit, I'm going to bank them on one side of the kettle so that way we get a really hot sear zone. And that would have been a little bit easier with something like the slow and sear, which helps gather everything together, but you can totally do it without any extra accessories. I'm gonna let that sit for a minute or two just to make sure the coals are fully lit. And I waited until the last minute to put the grill grates on because if they're sitting there over the fire, they're gonna get really hot and you're gonna burn your meat as soon as you put it on there. The trick here is to sear each side for a minute twice, so that would be a total of 4 minutes, and that should give you a pretty good sear. After that, we'll check the internal temperature. If you're not getting the sear that you like, on the second round, let it go just a little bit longer, and then you can get a beautiful crust. And I'm gonna cook the thin T-bone the exact same way. I'm going straight for the sear. I'm gonna go 1 minute per side twice for a total of 4 minutes, and then we'll check the temperature. And if they're not quite done, I'll just go put them over on the cool side, put the lid on it, and then let it cook for just a little bit longer. Don't let it go too long because it's gonna heat up pretty quick. And when it comes to medium rare, I like to pull my steaks at about 130 degrees Fahrenheit because they'll warm up just a little bit after you take them off. Both steaks have reached 130 degrees Fahrenheit, so I'm gonna take them off and let them rest. This little one is gonna take a little bit less time, maybe a couple minutes before you cut into it, but if you have a big, thick tomahawk like this one, you're gonna wanna give it 5 or 10 minutes before you cut into it. That'll allow the juices to redistribute and make it extra juicy for you. You probably noticed that I didn't put any seasoning other than salt before I cooked it, and that's because the sear will absolutely burn any seasoning that you put on there. Now's the time to add it with a little knob of butter. It's gonna be out of this world. This steak is so good, and I wish I could share it with you. But what I can share with you is my guide to getting the juiciest chicken breast. It's right over here. I'll test 3 different methods and find out which one comes out on top.